Hello everyone, my name's Andy Leonard and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation for the Data Platform Summit 2020. I'm honored to be here with you today, and I hope you're interested in learning a little about Azure DevOps and how we can apply continuous integration to SSIS using Azure DevOps. Well, with that, let's dive right in. Just a little bit about me. If you want to know more about me, probably your best bet is to go to your favorite search engine and type in Andy Leonard Data. I'm sure you'll find me, and there's some information about me here, and that's quite enough about me. Today we're going to talk about a brief history of CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. We're going to do a little bit of source control by example, and we're then going to dive in. We're going to look at Azure DevOps agents, followed by a dive into some pipelines and how they can help us with Azure DevOps and applying continuous integration to SSIS. Now, I need to be frank with you here. This is 100, 200, 300 level. We are not going into some of the more advanced topics, some of the other features that you can do in Azure DevOps. But this is mainly for people who are just getting started or who aren't using Azure DevOps, and I want to get you up at least to that middle level, maybe the 200, 300 level. And if I can do that, I will consider my goal achieved for this session. So if we look at just kind of my history with this topic, I presented years ago at the PASS Summit, and I've had this dream of SSIS developers being able to do the same sorts of source control and build automation that the JavaScript and the Node and C# developers have been doing for decades now, frankly. I love the automation, the build automation that was first surfaced, for me, the first place I saw it, I'll say it that way, was in Team Foundation Server. And you can see this is back in 2007. I actually traveled to Denver to the PASS Summit with 2 laptops and a Linksys router. So I didn't have enough beef on one laptop to run a presentation and do these demos. So I brought 2. And it was an okay presentation, I'll say it that way. But the dream of what I had back then, my dream when I shared in that presentation, that's what I want to share with you today. A lot of those things I dreamed about have come to pass and now are available to us. So I also wrote a book about this called Data Integration Lifecycle Management with SSIS, or DILM with SSIS. This book is it was written back in 2017. I didn't talk much about either Team Foundation Server or Git or Azure DevOps because that functionality just wasn't where it is today. I need to update the book. I really do. But, you know, we'll see how that works out. Maybe in 2021. One important thing that I did write in that book is something that applies to us here, because maybe you're thinking, Andy, we're talking about SSIS, SQL Server integration services. And you may be thinking this is data. It has nothing to do with software development. Well, that's not accurate. SSIS suffers from having the name of a relational engine in its title. But the truth is SSIS is software development. One clue is we build SSIS in Visual Studio, which is an integrated development environment, an IDE. And so software development best practices apply to what we're doing. So when we start talking about this, the very first thing that I want to talk about in CI/CD is this idea of source control. So I believe there are 2 types of developers, those who use source control and those who will, because you will lose some code. You'll make some changes and you'll forget to check them in, or maybe you're not using source control at all, and something unfortunate will happen. And you'll lose those changes, and after that you will start using source control. We're going to talk about connecting to Azure DevOps, configuring a project there, then configuring your IDE, your Visual Studio environment, to work with Azure DevOps, and then we're going to add that solution to source control. And rather than do this in demos, I've taken a lot of screenshots here of what it looked like recently. Now, if you're watching this recording or even some of these live screenshots that you're watching right now, you're going to look at this and say, gosh, Andy, it doesn't look that way when I do it. So there's a word for that, and that word is the cloud. Actually, it's two words. So the cloud. And the cloud changes every single day. And I just want to let you know, if you're not aware of that, that's a true thing. And if that bothers you, if things changing bothers you, then you may struggle with working with the cloud. And I'd hate to see you struggle. So what I would love to share with you is the best advice I think I can share with you is find a way to kind of divorce that feeling that, well, it doesn't look like it did yesterday. I had this experience a year or two back. I did a seminar right here in my office in Farmville, Virginia, where I'm coming to you from now. I did a seminar here around noon, local time, and then did some more work, jumped in my car, and I drove to Richmond, which is about 75 miles away. And 6 hours later is when I got there, and I did a presentation at a local user group. And I am not making this up. When I got to the same spot that I had been 6 hours earlier, as I was walking through this exact same presentation, something had changed. So please don't let things changing bother you, and please don't get upset when you see somebody's put a lot of time and effort into a blog post or blog series or presentations or books, and you read them and go, well, it doesn't look exactly like my screen. Well, figure it out, because guess what? It's going to change again, and you're going to have to figure it out then too. So that's my advice. When we first start with CI/CD, we have to create what we see here on the screen. So there's a lot of things on the screen here. There's my organization. I founded Enterprise Data and Analytics and ENTDNA. That's our that's entdna.com. That's our URL. But we just use this Enterprise DNA or ENTDNA as an acronym for us. That's an organization, and then you have to set up a project, and we see a project here, SSIS samples. So as we move through this, the first thing we need to do is create an account. So you want to sign up for Azure DevOps. They have free source control available here. So with up to a team of 5 individuals. So if you go to dev.azure.com, as you see here at the bottom, and you start for free. And again, you can do the source control portion of this and many other features you can do for free for some amount of time. And there's options here, and you want to read all through through all of the options, and you want to figure out what's going to work best for you and for your team. But like I said, up to 5 people can use this for free. That's hard to beat free. I guess they could pay you to use it. I don't know. But go here and set up your account. If you're not using this, go do that today. And if for no other reason than to just get your hands on the tool here and see how this works. The very first thing I did was I created my organization, and you can see ENTDNA over here, and I didn't walk through that piece of it. I'm going to let you do that, and then after you've created your organization, go ahead and create a new project. Now, your organization may just be you. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Mine is a consulting company that I founded back in 2016. So you click this new project button, and that's going to bring up the configure project or create new project. Then you get to pick whether it's public or private, and you get to set version control and work item process and that sort of stuff. And you can see here I picked Team Foundation version control and then Scrum. I like both of those, although I do use Git quite a bit. Once you've created it, you end up with a little card here that gives you a lot of good information, just an optional description that I put in there and the name. And some people ask me, Andy, why are you doing TFS? Everybody's using Git. And it's accurate, and I get why you might say that. But a lot of customers aren't using Git. Some people invested pretty heavily in Team Foundation services locally and on premises is what I mean by locally. So because they did that, some of them are unaware that Azure DevOps offers this option for people to use TFS in Azure DevOps. Maybe you don't want to learn a whole new engine, a whole new source control or version control engine like Git. And frankly, Git's not easy to learn. It just isn't. So Many people have used TFS and they're still using it, and they want a way to just continue to use that, leverage their existing knowledge. And that's something that I've helped organizations do. And it's not a trivial move to the cloud, but it can be done. And again, once you've got your stuff there, you can then begin to leverage that that knowledge that your institution already has. So after you've got your engine configured for that, and you can use Git. I use Git most of the time. I use TFS just for this presentation and a few other things. You can click on Visual Studio. You open Visual Studio, and on Tools, you can click Options. And this is the very first thing that you want to do after you get your engine set up. Is you want to, in Options, you want to expand source control. You can just click on it and select the plugin right there from the source control main page, the general page there. You can drop down the current source control plugin, and in this case I'm picking TFS, but note there's Git sitting right there, big as life. Once you've done that, then you want to connect your Visual Studio environment to your TFS environment online, Azure DevOps. So you do that by clicking Team and Manage Connections. There's some other ways to get to Team Explorer, but this is a good way to do it, at least initially. And then drop down Manage Connections and click Connect to a Project. The Connect to a Project window comes up, and you want to go ahead and log in. You want to pick your hosted repository. And I was able to log in using the Microsoft login. I skipped that step here, but you can do that. You know what that looks like. And if you don't, you will after you do this step. And then navigate through the dev.azure.com and then your organization, and then there will be one or more projects here if you've created a new project out there at dev.azure.com. Then you click Connect, and once you've done that, Team Explorer will show up, and it'll let you see, depending on whether you pick Git or TFS, it'll look differently. But you'll be able to see some things in common, like pending changes is common to both. I think it calls it something different in Git. I think it's just changes in the Git version of that. But it's similar functionality. It just goes about it in a different way, and the engine is totally different under the hood. So after you've brought up Team Explorer, you can now look at Solution Explorer, and if you want, you can grab a project or create a project at this point. And I created one here called Test SSIS Solution, and it's got 3 SSIS packages in it. And these are very basic SSIS packages. Just an aside here, report and fail. Why in the world would I write an SSIS package that's designed to fail? Well, I do that because you want to test what happens when SSIS fails. You want that failure to be elegant. You'd like for it to be managed in most cases at a bare minimum. You want it to tell you why it failed. So that's a good reason to test for failures. In fact, most of my testing is about what happens when something unexpected or untoward happens. You want to plan for that sort of stuff. That is just good engineering. Report and succeed is pretty easy, and that should work all the time. The one we're going to be using most today is write a record and succeed. And what that's going to do is it's going to, it has a couple of variations, and you'll see this when we get into the demos. But essentially, I want it to truncate a table in the cloud and then execute and write a record into that table. And then I want to run a test to see how many records are in that table. And the goal is to get to see if there's one record and only one record in that table. If there's 0, if there's more than one, well, that test is going to fail. And we're going to use the fact that it fails as we go through here to actually see how we respond to failures as we go. If I right click on the solution itself, I can add that solution to source control. And you can see right here how I do that in Visual Studio's Solution Explorer. Once I've done that, I have to pick where I'm going to send it. So I'm going to send it to my, I'm going to name the folder in source control the same name as my project here. And that's just a good idea. You want to keep your code locally in sync with the code that's in source control. And you also want to keep both of those in sync with what ends up in production. If you don't, it's just a recipe for disaster. And I've seen people make this mistake, so I'm going to warn you now, don't do this. Or definitely consider whether or not to do this. I'll say it that way. What I often warn people is, I'll say, unless you have a compelling reason to do so, and you won't have a compelling reason for this. I've seen people name things like test SSIS solution _ development. When you're checking it into source control, it's all development. But when you start pulling it out of source control to have someone deploy it to a production server, that's when it gets confusing. Who wants to deploy development code to a production server? Nobody should be raising their hand. So just name this the name of whatever it is, and then you can promote the code to different tiers, 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 levels in your data integration lifecycle management. Just be aware of that. So once you've done that, once you've got it written out there, Solution Explorer will indicate for TFS that the code has been stored in source control, but it has not yet been checked in. So it's a status change between saying stored or ready or staged in Git. That's the word Git uses, is staged for this. But then you want to commit that change. That's another Git term. So you just want to check it in when you're done there. And you can right click again and click check in. And when you do, you can add a comment, and you can see I took this particular screenshot a little more than a year ago. And I always do this. I'll put in, the date and then my name, even though that's all stored in metadata. And then I'll put in initial check-in. I started doing this literally decades ago. And this is just a check-in comment that has stuck with me. You do not have to do your comments like this. Like I said, the date and who checked it in, those are going to be captured by metadata, so you can shorten up your comments if you want. Do yourself a favor, though. Leave a comment. In Git, for instance, it requires you to leave a check-in comment, and or it may be configurable. I'm not positive of that, but the default is you need a check-in comment. You want to do that for future you. Right now, y'all are young, and your minds are just sharp as whips and stuff like that. As I record this, I'm 57 years old, and I'm telling you, when you get 57 years old, your mind is going to slow down just a touch. Maybe your memory length is going to shorten just a bit. And 18 months from now, if you have to crack this code back open and look at one of these check-ins and figure out why you did what you did, if that's blank or a space, come on, don't put a space. If it's blank, though, there's no helpful information in there, you're going to really wish past you had taken 30 seconds and typed something in here. Even if it's initial check-in, just something. And do that for yourself. Also, do you like taking time off from work? I do. And when I do, and I'm on vacation, and my team is working on some code that I checked in 18 months ago, I don't want them to have to guess at what I did or try and decipher what I wrote here. So I am actually pretty verbose when I write my comments in here about what I did exactly. I include documentation in the code, documentation using annotations on the control flow, because when you open an SSIS package, the control flow is the first thing to display. So using annotations to add documentation there, documenting with your check-ins, all of this is helpful. And it gives everybody a fighting chance at figuring out exactly why you did what you did. One last note about that. I gave you 2 instances of where documentation are. I use more than 2. And often I copy and paste the same information in 3 different locations. And if you're sitting there and your head's exploding and you're thinking, Andy, that's just wasting time, you're right. And I'd be happy to refund all of the digital paper that you're spending money on. I'm kidding. Not only will I not refund it, it doesn't cost anything. Take a little bit of time. Add a little bit of intention to your coding. Somebody, somewhere, maybe you, will thank you later. And why do I duplicate all of that? Why make people dig? Not everybody thinks like you do, okay? Not everybody thinks like me. Thank goodness. So why not make it easy for them, not just for me, okay? Somebody else is going to be reading this. All right, I'm going to kick that soapbox back under my desk here and move forward. So after I've checked in code, TFS puts these little locks beside all of my code here, and you can see these little Azure colored locks. Get it? So there they are, and my code is now checked in Visual Studio. Well, let's take a look over in Azure DevOps, and let's look at the repository. So let's see, I'm going to pop over here to my VM. There we are. And this is my repos for this. Now, when you look at this version of it, you're like, wow, Andy, there's a lot more DTSX files in there. And you're right. Run for some time, and fail. There's write a record and succeed. Report a parameter and succeed. That's a new one as well. And these are in here because I've made changes to this project. I actually made these changes for an upcoming book that's coming out. It's one on building custom tasks. It's the second edition of that book coming out next year. And you can see I've made these changes at various times. This was if I can sort actually by the this is the first changes. If I do my last changes, the last change I made was just a few weeks ago, October 20th, 2020. 10/20/2020. There's a date for you. And this is what the repo looks like. And that, you know, I can have many projects inside of my SSIS samples. Here's another project completely. It's called Parent-Child Demo. And there's just a lot in here that I can look at. So this is what the repo looks like inside of Azure DevOps. Not much to that demo other than, hey, this is what it looks like. So continuing, and oh, I forgot to tell you this earlier. I'm a recorded Andy. I did this in the past, not too long in the past, certainly not when it was due, but in the past. And real life Andy is on right now, probably making fun of me in the chat window if there's one available. I'm pretty sure there are. And so I'm here if you have questions about anything as I'm presenting here and talking about it. Live Andy is here to answer those questions. How cool is that? I actually like that a lot about virtual conferences, that I can be on and answer any questions that attendees may have. So our next talk is really about agents, our next section here. And we're going to look at how do you configure agents in Azure DevOps. And we're going to talk about self-hosted Windows agents. The reason that I talk about the self-hosted versus the cloud-hosted ones is when I started doing work with this, actually, I read in one of the places in documentation, they said, you need to use the Windows versions of these and VPC hosted or what have you. And I was like, what do you mean? So I tried that. I checked the defaults and walked through it that way. And it turned out it was taking about 10 or 12 or 15 minutes sometimes for the agents to pick up and start executing the SSIS packages when it was time to do that. And thinking back now, you know, kind of having gone through a lot more experience with what's going on, what does it take to spin up, you know, an agent in the cloud to do this? Well, they've got to make a VM behind the scenes. Then they've got to install and configure everything on it. And in this case, it's got to be able to run SSIS. That's not trivial. So you know what? 10 or 15 minutes really isn't bad when you think about it that way. But what if I use a self-hosted Windows agent? Well, that thing's ready to go right away. And that's what I discovered. And I was really impressed with just how fast. It took a couple seconds. And we'll see this when we do the demos. Demo after next. It'll just start almost immediately. In order to configure this, we're looking at personal access tokens. This allows us to connect our local instance here to something in the cloud. And I got to tell you, I'm absolutely thrilled by this. I was kind of shocked at how much this tickled me. So it turns out that I've got a virtual machine. That's what we're running on. It's named vDemo. And I've got a self-hosted Windows agent running on my VM, and it's going to connect to Azure DevOps in the cloud, and they're going to interact with each other, and we'll see exactly how that works. Not only that, but they made it really, really easy. I was super impressed with the setup for this. So there's this blog post, and you can get the URL down there at the bottom. It's not a blog post; it's an article. And I'm sure it's been updated since August of 2019, and it's most likely changed some. just so you know. And you can look at how to set up these self-hosted agents here. The one thing that I found that was different in that particular article was they showed the personal access tokens in a different place. So that's why I've circled the little person with a gear here. That's where they are. That's where they actually are now. You can find personal access tokens. And listen, if you run into something where the documentation or the screen or the video or whatever doesn't match what you're seeing, click around, right? Don't click a bunch of buttons and spend a lot of money, but look around. How, it's just a touch of initiative here will take you a long way, just a pinch. Once you click on personal access tokens, if you're doing this for the very first time, you're not going to see any tokens in there. I've got about 50. So I say that. I don't know. Maybe it's probably around 20 at least in there. But you click this new token button, and when you do, that creates a new token. You'll see these blades is what they're called. They'll slide out. You pick, for self-hosted, you want to use the default agent pool here. And you're going to want to look at custom defined, and again, that article will walk you through all of the things you want to set. You definitely want to do read and manage for agent pools, and there's one on here not shown on here that you also want to do. I did a bad job of editing that image. I can't remember what it is exactly, but it allows you to do SSIS executions. That's what you're after. So once that's done, you want to now go into your organization settings. So again, at the very beginning, right after you created your account, you wanted to create your organization and set all that up so you can then add projects to it. I don't believe you can add a project until you've set up an organization, at least giving it a name. And under organization settings, you're going to find agent pools, and you're going to want to click that. And again, you've got Azure pipelines, which you want to use that pool for if you're going to run in the cloud, if you're going to run agents in the cloud. The default pool is going to allow you to configure that to run locally. That's what I wanted to do. So I clicked on default, and then I clicked the new agent button when that appeared. This I love. I absolutely love this. So this is what you need to know to set up an Azure DevOps agent locally on your Windows machine. But look, you can see right here, if you want to set one up on Mac or on Linux, you just click the tab. It's going to walk you right through this. I'm doing x64 in Windows. So when you click download the agent, it actually downloads a zip file, and it's got a name that has a lot of good information in it. In fact, the name of the file it downloaded here was vsts-agent-win-x64-2.158.0.zip. That's the name of the file it downloaded. Now, you're going to get a totally different file name now. The numbers are going to be higher and that sort of stuff. And then it passes in this $P word, PWD. So what this is right here, and there will be little copy icons up here that you can click and copy this. This is PowerShell. And after you do the download, don't download it and put it somewhere else. Go ahead and put it in your default directory, which is $home /downloads. You want to let that file download to there because this is a command. And this is going to make a directory, and it's going to decompress that file, and it's going to send it into your agent directory. It's going to make a directory name agent, and it's going to unzip it and put the contents in there. After that, you're going to want to run the configure agent, ./config.command, depending on how you're doing this. You're going to see I did this differently. I actually did this from DOS, not PowerShell, after I got it unzipped. And then run, the run command. This is a beautiful piece of user experience right here. I think they did a phenomenal job, and I want to give whoever designed this kudos. I don't know who built this. This is a great design. So after that, you can see here's after I run that PowerShell piece to do the unzip, here's me doing the config command, and it starts out by saying, where is your organization? It's going to be https://dev.azure.com/something. That something is going to be your organization settings. And that's not the last one. You're going to see there's a number of settings that it has to go through here. It just starts with that, and it walks through the authentication type. PAT is personal access token. That's what we're using. And then if you type that or just hit enter, it's going to ask you about that personal access token. Now, I should have told you this earlier, but I don't show you the screenshot where it popped up the personal access token for me when I was configuring that. But you want to copy that personal access token and save it somewhere. Maybe you don't want to save it, but maybe open Notepad++ or Notepad or whatever editor you like and paste that value in there. Because once you click OK, it's gone forever. Now, all is not lost. If you get to here and you realize, oh, I've been following along with Andy, and he didn't tell me that early enough in time, you're absolutely right. I didn't. But you're not lost. You can go back and create another personal access token. There's no extra charge. And just set one up, and now you can copy it and then paste it into this config part here. It'll then try and connect to the server using your personal access token for authentication, and it'll register the agent. So you can see it starts prompting you after it connects, and this usually only takes a couple seconds. And then it asks you, do you want to use the default? What's the agent name? And when I configured this, I did it initially on my P51 laptop, and that was the designation for an old aircraft called the Mustang. It was nicknamed the Mustang. It does these pieces where it starts looking for things that are, all of the pieces it needs. It needs to look at the tool capabilities. That changes with different versions. It needs to add the agent and then test the connection to the agent. And then it prompts for the work folder. I just use _work, and you'll see this when we go back to the VM. And then after the settings are saved, it says, do I want to run this agent as a service? Now, I never do, but you may want to. And then, do I want to configure auto log on and run it on startup? No, that's kind of the same as running it as a service. I don't need to do all that. I'll just start it when I need it. And the next thing is we need to start the agent. And we do that just by typing run.cmd. And this is me. I'm setting in a command prompt here. It scans for the tool capabilities, connects to the server, and you'll know it's done when it pops up this listening for jobs piece here. So let's go over here and run this demo. So let's begin by taking a look at what's in this agent folder before we started. And we can see there's a few folders. There's that work folder it created. There's a diagnostics folder here _diag. And then there's the run and config commands. So we are going to begin by just typing run. And when we do, our agent installed on a virtual machine running on a laptop is going to communicate with Azure DevOps, and now it's sitting there listening for jobs. So that's really it. Not too exciting yet, but hang on, the excitement's coming. So if we return now to the PowerPoint, we can see our next step is to look at pipelines. And pipelines are where we set up all of the magic that we want to happen. Now again, this is where I kind of run up against the limit of what I'm going to share with you today. And I want to reiterate that I'm not using artifacts. I'm not using testing officially. I'm using PowerShell to actually conduct manual tests. But there's steps in here. So I don't know whether to call them manual or not. They are automated. I mean, I am saving them here. But this is not the traditional way to do testing and then doing deployment jobs. I'm using some new build and deploy tasks that are put out. They've been around for about a year now. And the build SSIS task and the deploy SSIS task. We're also going to take a minute to configure a variable for our password, because I don't want to give you my password. Nothing personal. I'm just that way, and I hope you're cool with that. So let's walk through how we would construct a new pipeline. Over in the Azure DevOps list here for our menu rather for our SSIS samples project, we would pick pipelines, and then we'd pick new and make a new build pipeline. So we need to do this no matter what. Then it asks us where is our code in this particular version, and we've stored our code in TFS, so it's Team Foundation Version Control. It's looking for a source of our code, and again we pick our source engine, TFS, and then we either type or search for the server path and then click continue. And our server path is $/SSIS samples here. When we click continue, it asks, do we want to use a template? I want to start with an empty job here. I want to show you how to build this from the ground up. So first it asked me for my agent pool, how are you going to set this up? Are you going to use the hosted Azure pipelines, which is the default, or are you going to use private, which is the default agent pool? I'm using that default. And the very first thing I'm going to do under variables is set up a PWD bar. This is my password variable. When I configured that, I marked it as sensitive so that it doesn't share with you and everybody my super secret password. When I configure my agent job's name, I'm going to give it some name that makes sense. You're going to see we're going to look at about 4 agent jobs before we're finished here today. And again, I'm picking up my my agent configuration from that screen. Next, I want to add a new build SSIS task. So this is available from the gallery, and Microsoft has wrote these tasks themselves. If you search for SSIS, you'll see this is official SSIS build task from for SSIS DevOps from Microsoft. Now I just click that add button, and when I do, it adds it to my steps. This is one of the SSIS, this is the build SSIS task in my first pipeline here. So as I'm walking through here, we see that I'm going to build it. I'm going to configure this to pick up my test SSIS solution and write it to this output path. This is a $build.artifact staging directory here. And we're going to see that again, especially when we add this deploy task. So when we start deploying this, we see I'm naming it deploy SSIS, nothing fancy there. But there's that build artifact staging directory, and then I'm driving down into the ISPack file location. So the ISPack is the deployment pack for integration services, and really it's just a zip file, but it has the packages and a couple of files in there to manage the deployment. The destination type, I can pick SSIS DB if I'm going to an SSIS catalog, and I am, but there are other options here as well. And the name of my server is actually a cloud server, svademo.database.windows.net. And then I'm sending this into a destination path using SQL Server authentication and my login, and there's that PWD bar right there. If it exists already, I'm going to overwrite it. And do I want to continue if an error occurs? No, stop. Break on error, please. So if we look at the build execution, I first want to review a couple of things that really that have changed since those original screenshots were set. We see our agent is still running out here, but if I pop into back into Azure DevOps here, and actually I first want to go over to Azure Data Factory, because this is where I've configured the runtime that we're going to use. This is an Azure SSIS integration runtime inside of ADF. This allows me to run packages either stored in an SSIS catalog or an Azure file share, or I can actually embed packages, the binaries for the packages in here. There's a number of ways to do this that don't really apply to everything we're saying here, but I'm going to use this because there's my svademo.database.windows.net. That is the Azure SQL DB where my SSIS catalog lives, and as we can see, it is running. That's there it is right there. It's actually running. So we'll catch up with that in a minute. So if we go back to our configuration here, let's go look at our pipelines, and we're going to start with this 0 pipeline that's down at the bottom now. And if I click on that, it'll open up the kind of the individual pipeline viewer, and I can click on edit. And when I open the editor here, we can see this is my build task. So if I wanted to add a new task, I'm just going to click this plus here, and you can see it's going to take me over to this window, and there's a number. There's a whole lot of tasks in here. Azure DevOps task, not SSIS. And some of these are built by people in the community. Some of them are marketplace. Some you have to pay for. A number of them are free. And if I just type in SSIS, we can see there's been updates to these, right? So there's different things. And this SSIS catalog configuration, that's relatively recent. That was released in 2020. So the ones that we're using is, we're going to use this SSIS build, but we're using an older version of it, just so you know. So once we click the build SSIS here, I just named it build SSIS. There's my project path, and there's that output path. And then again, for the deploy SSIS, this is important, that build.artifact staging directory. And then where is it going? And then the name of the location. So I hadn't updated this from an earlier presentation, and I apologize for that screenshot. But this is now going to DevOps test. I want to use SQL Server authentication. There's my username, and there's my PWD var. So if we go look, we mentioned that. Let's go look at variables here, and we can see that that variable is right there. There it is, encrypted, all set up and encrypted. So again, back to the task, back to deploy, and that way we're able to store that and preserve the encryption of it. Overwrite it, sure. Continue deployment when an error occurs. No, don't do that. And there's a number of other options that we're just not going to dig into for the purposes of this demo. Now, before we go any further, I want to pop over here and look at what's in that catalog. So to do this, I'm choosing to use a utility that I wrote, and it's available for free, SSIS Catalog Browser. And you can go to dilmsuite.com and download this for free. And we can see that in my DevOps test folder here, I do have a version of this project sitting out here already. There's the test SSIS project. And if we open it up and look at the packages, we can see there's all of the packages that are associated with that project in its current state. If we look at DevOps Prod here, we see that there's one there already, and we're going to want to overwrite that here in just a minute. So before we go any farther, I'm going to pause and go delete that project. The magic of on-demand video editing here. And now you can see that version of the DevOps Prod is gone. So definitely wanted to move that out of the way. And if we look here again, we can see that that's where it's going to deploy. This first version is going to deploy it to the DevOps test folder. Now there's already a version out there, but it's going to overwrite that. And so we can do that build execution. And the pipeline we're going to use to do this is this zero dash build and deploy. Note that we can do that by manually queuing it here, and that's what I'm going to do. It asks me for information about this. I'm just going to leave everything as the default and click Run. Now when I do that, it pops right over to the jobs part of this, and if I click the jobs part, I get to see this really cool looking console here, and I absolutely love this. And you'll note that that initialized job was the first thing up there. That actually loaded the remainder of the steps, and it's just walking through the deployment here. We'll see success or failure. If I had my email turned on, we'd see that we'd hear a ding as I received an email when this job finishes, and it would tell me whether it succeeded. It looks like it did succeed. I get nice green text, and that makes me happy. So that's really cool. What it did is it just redeployed out there to to that folder, that DevOps test folder. So absolutely digging that it does that. And I'm going to pop back over to pipelines because we're going to get ready to do an additional surprise deployment here. So yep, there's more. We're going to do we're going to add some test SSIS execution and then test the results, test evaluation. And before we do that, we're going to take a look at the package and see exactly what's going on here. But there's a couple of pieces. So in order to execute that particular SSIS package, I've created another free utility. It's actually not only free, but it's open source. It's called the SSIS Framework Community Edition. And you can get this out at dilmsuite.com as well. Just a little bit about how it works is you can build your own if you like. What I did was I just did exactly what you see here inside of the Integration Services Catalogs node in SSMS. I navigated down to a package, right-clicked it, and clicked Execute. And when I did, it brought up this Execute Package window. It also allows me to script the execution. And I had one of the things that bothered me a little bit about running from the catalog is that in order to execute another package in the project, the package had to be part of the project. Now, it's actually possible to run a package inside of the catalog, to run a package outside of the catalog in the file system. But I consider that kind of jacking up the catalog, And I don't want to mix and match like that. I either want to run everything in the file system or everything in the SSIS catalog. And one of the limitations of running another package, a child package, using the execute package task, is that that package has to live in that same project. So I didn't really like that either. I felt like I had no choice until I scripted this. And I saw this pattern as old as computing. There's 3 steps here. There's create execution, which creates an intent to execute. Down here, set execution parameter value for the logging level. This is just one example of maybe many calls to this stored procedure where we would configure the intent to execute. So up here, we create the intent to execute. We get an execution ID out. And note that when we configure the intent to execute, we're passing that execution ID. Once we're done with however many steps is here in the middle configuring, we then execute. And again, all we do is pass that execution ID and the retry count into it, and it just works. So what I did was, I said, you know, what excited me about this is I wanted to run packages that lived in other projects and other folders in the same catalog. And this has all of that in there, the package name, folder name, and project name. So I just encapsulated that code into a stored procedure in a custom schema inside of SSIS DB named execute catalog package. And again, you can go get this code. It's free and open source. Go to dilmsuite.com and click on SSIS Framework Community Edition. You can pick this right up. I use that SSIS framework, that very same one. It works in the cloud, in Azure SSIS. It works on premises. It's pretty handy code. And I actually use that for an Azure PowerShell step called Run SSIS Package using the SSIS framework. So I call a single stored procedure, one that I wrote, and I pass it a single value, and it'll run one package. The value that I'm passing is the name of an SSIS framework application, which is one or more packages that it runs in a specific order. So I can run 1, or I can run 10 or 100 packages just by passing one parameter to one stored proc here. And then I test it. That's the next thing I do. What am I testing? Well, when we get into the demo, I'll show you. We're testing, is there one value and only one value in our test table? We want to write that record and then pop right out of there. I just added the Azure PowerShell objects here. I went over and searched just like I searched for SSIS. I searched for Azure PowerShell, brought in 2 instances of that, and then configured the PowerShell here. And you can see I'm connecting, and then I actually give this a little bit of time here, right, to pause and wait, and then I execute this using again this is an execution of the stored procedure. Or sorry, this is an execution of the test. Selects the max date is date and the count star, and I'm checking to see if that record count that comes back is not equal to 1. Because if it's equal to 1, that's what I want. That's success. If it's not equal, then I'm going to raise an error and throw that out there. The last piece of this puzzle is I am going to enable continuous integration on the deploy to test. That's my first step. That's where I'm going to start. Then I'm going to configure the deploy to production pipeline, and I'm going to enable a deploy to production trigger on that. So I'm going to make it so when I first enable the continuous integration on deploy to test, it's really easy. You just go to triggers and you just check the box, enable continuous integration. Save this, and now part of my dream comes true, okay? I'm able now to check in the code, and when the code gets checked in, when my SSIS project gets checked in, then it's going to enable continuous integration, and it's going to run this deploy to test pipeline right here on a check-in. After this, I'm going to be able to add, and modify my deploy to production. And if I add a build completion here, and then I pick that deploy to test step, when it finishes deploy to test, which fires on check-in, then it's going to run this deploy to production. And finally, it's going to that's going to trigger another execution in production and a second test in the prod version of this as well. So let's take a look at all of these moving parts here just to get a sense of how it's going to work. And if I'm doing this on check-in. So let's look at the SSIS package first. I want to start by zooming in here. How do I get one and only one record in there? Well, I'm writing the value here, and I'm just sticking in a date time. The truncate target table, though, this writes a value to the target table. This truncates it first. So what I need to do is introduce a change. And here's the thing. It's really easy to create a change in SSIS. You don't really have to change anything. I just opened up this execute SQL task, and I'm going to click OK. And when I do that, note, I got a little asterisk here. I didn't change anything. I just clicked OK, but it doesn't know that. So it sees everything like that as a change. So I'm going to call this my CI change. And when I check this in, what we're going to see is the agent job will begin executing. Now, we didn't look at that before, but we're going to see it now. So I'm going to zoom out, and when I do the check-in here, we're going to pop back over to the window. And so there was that 0 build and deploy completed and succeeded. Look, it's now going to see this other job, I think. Oh, no, it's not. I showed you what I'm going to do, but I didn't do it. Let's go do it. It'll go ahead and it won't do anything for us because we didn't set up the trigger. So let's go to our pipeline and let's look at build and deploy. Let's go to edit and go to triggers. So right now there's no triggers on here. That's why I didn't do anything. Yes, it checked the code in, which was awesome, but it didn't fire my pipeline. So now that I've got this checked, that's all I have to do is check that box and save it. And if I go now back to my pipelines, let's go here and pipelines, zoom out so we can get to this a little easier. That's what we want to do on check-in, build and deploy to test. If we go edit the second pipeline here, we're going to be able on triggers to say do a build completion trigger. So I'm going to add one, and it pops this triggering build up. And which one do I want to use? Let's go ahead and run that one. Do that one build and test. Scroll up a little bit and save that. And I'm not going to give it a message here. I'm just doing this for demo purposes. Finally, I've already got this one configured. I'm just going to show you on number 3. I've done exactly the same thing on triggers I just showed you. I've got it set to run whenever number 2 fires. So now we're ready to actually execute. By the way, it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It did what I told it to. I take that back. Not what I wanted it to do. So again, we're going to trigger this and go ahead and save it. There's been a change. And we're going to go, I'm going to name this one Continuous Integration Test. And check that in. And now when we do, and we pop over here, we should see the number 1 job fire all. There it goes. So there's number 1. Let's pop over to the pipelines, and if we click on number 1, we should see a job running. There it is, Continuous Integration Test. And we got a little progress bar running right there. We click this, and we click on the job, and now we're going to see our console, again, kind of doing its thing. Except now, when this finishes, and hopefully it will finish and succeed. It's okay if it doesn't finish, or if it doesn't succeed. We can see what's going on. Why would it fail? We're actually going to rerun this and show you a failure, what it would look like. So it's working through, and this takes some time. But this makes me all giggly inside to see this console in a web page walking through these steps, these pipeline, very linear steps here. This is what I wanted for data and SSIS projects for 20 years. I was an MCSD before .NET, and I learned about test-driven development back in the 90s when the years began with a 1. True story. And I wanted to be able to do that as soon as I jumped the fence into business intelligence. I wanted to be able to do that same thing for databases and database development, and then SSIS when I started working with that. And I was a little shocked that we didn't have the same sort of functionality. We did have some ways that we could do this, but there were caveats, and lots of them. So very excited to see TFS let me source control SSIS back in the 2000s, mid 2000s, and then really excited too to see this build automation, which popped up about a year ago, 2019. We go back into our pipelines now. We see the deploy to production is running. We're going to go ahead and get onto the screen, and then we're going to pop back over to agent and note that it's telling us wrong button. Telling us that deploy to production is running, and number one, build and deploy to test completed with the success result. So let's pop back in here. That one just succeeded. Gosh, they're too fast. They're running too fast today. That's not a valid complaint. There's our continuous integration test. There's our vDemo job for that one, and we see it's initializing, and you got to catch it then. That initialize job step loads the rest of the steps as they move through here. We did the deployment already, and if we go look at Catalog Browser, we can see what it was showing us before was there was no project in there. Now if we click refresh and expand, we'll see that, yep, in prod there has been a project deployed, and it is our test SSIS project. And we're running right now, we're running write a record and succeed. Again, we're going to test it one more time. And what it's doing is it's actually cleaning up some production framework metadata, and then it's going to deploy a fresh copy. Shouldn't take long for that. And then it's going to execute the production file in. It's actually going to execute this in prod. So kind of cool that it does that. So it doesn't retest it in production, although it could. It's not hard to add those couple steps to do that. I think it's only one step, that Azure PowerShell, that would rerun that test, and then we get a success or failure on the execution in production. But the idea here, again, is just to get your feet wet, to get you started in in Azure DevOps with SSIS. Not exhausting the topic by any means, but I love being able to show you all this free functionality that just works in here. And once it's executed, we'll be able to see whether it succeeded or failed. I'm going to zoom out here again, go back to the console here, and we should be able to see the post-job checkout succeed, and then we'll see this succeeded. There it is. And again, if I had email running, you'd hear the message pop up from me getting another email telling me, hey, you just succeeded number 3 there. So you can see them there in order right now on the pipelines. And I can look at all of the runs or just individual runs. These are the recent runs that it just did, the recent collection of runs. It shows me the last set of runs, the last one for each pipeline that I executed here. Let's do that failure while we're here. Let's pop over, and how do we get it to fail? Well, if we disable the truncate and save this, then it should fail. We're going to leave everything just like it was, but it should fail as it runs through the process here. And it should fail on that deploy to test, the number 1 job. So now we just see that agent fired it off. If we go back to pipelines here and go to deploy and test, there's my assert fail that I just created. And we should see when it executes the test suite, this is what should fail. And it should give us a good message saying that I think it actually counts the number of rows and tells us there are 2 records found in there. And I want it to fail. This is intentional. You want to see that it actually does its failing, just like I designed it to. So this will be a test of the test, maybe. Is that meta testing? I'm not sure. But we'll check this out, and once we're done, we'll get to see what the test results were, and I'll run it one more time just to clean things up. So again, I find this fascinating. We can communicate with these agents and talk here locally on a VM of all places. The agent's running on a VM. Absolutely love this. Again, live Andy's here. If you have questions, you can ask them anytime. You can ask questions at the end, of course. We're allotting some time at the end for that as well. But please type your questions in if you have them now. Let's see. We are ticking along here. Again, supposed to fail. And we'll see that not only in the in the report here when it's done evaluating. It's running a query and it's going to bring back 2 records instead of 1. And there it is. There are 2 records found, and it pops out. So if we look now, if we pop back to pipelines, we shouldn't see any running. And I'm going to refresh a couple of times. It shouldn't be running number 2 because that number 1 did not successfully build. There's an error message that's being emailed to me, and if we zoom in here on the agent, it tells me it failed. So again, how do I clean this up? I'll do this while we're zooming out and getting ready to take any questions that you have. And for this one, I'm going to assert success. Did I spell that right? I did not. There we go. All right, now we're going to check in. And that checked in successfully. We should see our agent job running. There it goes. It just fired off. And if we go back to build and deploy and test, we should see one running. Asserts asset, not assert. Typing in demos. But there we go. And this, while this is running, we'll just zoom out here and be happy to take any of your questions at all. So I'm just going to let this this roll on. While we're here, I want to say thanks to Data Platform Summit 2020 for giving me the opportunity to present again. It is always an honor to present. And I also want to let you know that if I can help in any way, my email address is andy.leonard@entdna.com. And you can learn more at my blog, andyleonard.blog. There's actually a Learn More link there on andyleonard.blog. So again, if I can help, I love helping in any way that I can. So it's going to finish up this execute test suite. This is where we are, and we should see this job finished. Finish. Move this over just a little bit so we can see the next job kick off. Yeah, we're not going to be able to see all of that, but we can see some of it. See if we do it like that. That's better. We should see that success pop up down here. I know it's hard to see, and I apologize for that. There we go. Succeeded, and then it should kick off number 2. That's the next one we'll see. Unless I turned off the integration. Yep, there it goes. There's number 2, and you can see it down here. It's going as well. All right, that's really all I have. As I said, I want a special thanks to Microsoft for supporting Data Platform Geeks and SQL Server Geeks. These are community initiatives. I'd also like to acknowledge the teams behind this. They are astounding. They do a lot of work. It's volunteer. They put a lot of hours into this, and I think they do a fantastic job. I really appreciate them, and I think you should too. As I said, it is always an honor to present. Thank you.